Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Voice of Adoptees, which brings together diverse and unique voices from around the world to share their stories. If you liked today's episode, remember to give us a like, subscribe, and leave a review. Here's your host, David Shunk.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Voice of Adoptees podcast. Today, we have a special guest up in Canada from Toronto. He is Corne. He also goes by Yuri as well, so we can dive into that relationship of our names, because as many adoptees know, we usually have a birth name and then sometimes it's changed. So we'll dive into that. But Corne, Yuri, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us today. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us who you are?
Thank you so much for having me, David. It's a pleasure. My name is Corne Van Hopen. I am 29 years old. I was born in Novosibirsk, Russia, and found my way here in Canada.
All right. That's pretty, the last name sounds very German, I have to say.
Dutch.
Okay. I only asked because my adopted last name was Shunk, and my adopted relatives came from the Germany, Russia kind of region, but okay, Dutch. Do you speak any Dutch or?
Fluent. I was adopted into a Dutch community, and I think for the first 4 years, we basically just spoke Dutch at home because my adoptive family wanted me to be fluent in a second language, and the area I was in, that was Dutch. So it's one of those languages I find that, I'm fluent in it, but the abilities to use it is pretty lean. So.
Yeah. Well, that's still impressive to have another language under your belt. So what age were you adopted at from Russia?
I was 18 months.
18 months. And It's safe to assume you don't have probably any memories, or maybe you do, or?
I find trigger memories, if that makes sense. There'll be certain moments, especially, and we'll probably get into this later in the show, but when I went back to Russia, that was where just feelings, I think it was just a sense of familiarity, but I don't have any tangible memories from that age, no.
Okay. Yeah. It's good that you brought up the whole going back and having things that kind of make you feel a certain way, because I agree with you when I went back. Same type of scenario. So tell us about kind of your childhood growing up. What was it like being a Russian adoptee growing up in Canada?
I'm thankful for the sense that my parents were always very open with my background and given the information for the level that I could perceive it. So, as, 2-year-old, 3-year-old, you have no sense really of, how you're born and how you come to exist in this world, right? But one thing I do recall for as long as I can remember is my mom. There was a poem that used to hang in my bedroom, and it was, "Not flesh of my flesh, not bone of my bone, but still remembrance my own. You didn't grow under my heart, but in it." So I always knew that there was something different about the way I came to exist in my world. And I guess just growing and adapting, basically coming to terms with that part of my history. And I think once I got into school, I think that's where it very much because everyone around me, because it was a very tight-knit community that I was adopted into. So everyone knew oh, this is that kid from Russia, right?
Yeah.
My parents were one of the first ones in the community to actually go abroad and adopt kids from a different country. So it was very much testing the waters, not just in a sense of family, but just in all areas, the extended family. It was something that really shook, I think, the community in a sense.
Yeah. If you don't mind me asking, did the community, the Dutch community that you were adopted and kind of grew up into, what was their view on adoption?
That's a tough one. I wouldn't feel like I'd be able to speak on what their perception was of that.
Yeah, that's fair.
I really felt it to my face that I was an outsider, if that makes sense. I feel like in my extended family and even beyond, I was welcomed as one of the own. But I think growing up, there was small moments. For example, my name was changed. My full birth name is Yuri Sergeyevich Cherson, but it was changed to a more Western name. That's what my parents that they wanted to do. But they did keep my middle name, Sergeyevich. So I remember even in grade 4, people found out that I had a different middle name, and it became a thing whenever tests or something had to be handed out. I do remember kids running to the front of the room because they wanted to see the paper with my name on it, because it was something that I didn't feel comfortable coming to terms with, I guess, because I really at that age wanted to blend in and fit in. So I didn't want anything to be, like stick out, because I feel like it's such a formative age that you're just trying to blend in with everybody, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. That's actually pretty. It's pretty cool that they at least kept a little bit of the Russian name. That's a common practice that a lot of the orphanages would tell the adoptive parents how important it is for identity, and a lot of them end up usually saving the middle name. Like my middle name it was Olegovich, but they ended up making my Russian name Maxim my middle name today. So I'm David Maxim, which
Okay.
that's cool. But it's funny how you said people just call you that, the Russian or the adoptee, right? I mean, it's like it's like they forget we have names, but it's just easier because they remember you off. Oh, that's the kid from Russia, and
Yeah.
well, that's interesting. So how did your like friends take it? Were they interested into your story? Did they ever encourage you to talk about it, or?
I think looking back, it was something that was cool, I guess, mostly because there were only a couple of us. My parents had gone to Russia with a couple that's their close friends, and they also adopted two boys from the same orphanage that I was adopted from. So it was kind of the trio of us. So in some ways, I'm kind of thankful for that and they were around my age as well. So it wasn't just me by myself in this community in that sense, where
Right.
I felt like there were always a couple of other people that kind of understood that journey. And we did very much hang out together. And yeah, we stayed very close with their families. So yeah.
Nice. Okay. That's awesome. So growing up, what was your exposure to any Russian culture, or if any? I mean, I know you said you grew up in the Dutch kind of community, but did you ever experience Russian foods or music or?
Not at that age. I remember there was, through the adoption agency, we used to have these yearly kind of dinners where we used to go all together. And for me, that kind of is when I began to feel the first nudges of, wait, there's actually a community of us. And for me, that gave me very much a sense of belonging. But like you said, that was the first time where I was actually more exposed to the culture aspect of it, because I think, how do you begin to comprehend as a child that there's this whole other almost universe of where you've been established, when where you're being raised, that's what's the norm, right? So
Right.
for me, that's 6, 7, 8, 9, even probably up to 11. I was very much, this is my life, I'm a Canadian, very much blended into where I was living. And it was through these events that I somehow got a glimpse, like, wait, this is what it means to be Russian. I am still Russian, like that's my genetics, that's where I was born. And hearing the music, tasting the food, it was just like, it kind of felt like a sense of home in a way where it's not tangible, but it's just, you just feel it. And then I think that through that's when I started to more explore my identity and like, who am I? Am I Canadian? Am I Dutch? And then through that, I'm like, okay, I'm definitely not Dutch. Like, let's put that to the side. But, it's like, okay, I'm a Russian. What does that mean? And just, there's nobody also guiding you on this like journey as well. Like I was very much isolated in that kind of sense, where
Yeah.
it's a journey of self-exploration, really.
Yeah, no, definitely. It was so that's a perfect answer, because it leads into my next question. What age did you really start to, ask yourself, hey, maybe I should look for family, or maybe I have more out there that I want to seek? What age did that curiosity kind of start at?
If I could be, that's a tough question. And I can say some like interesting things here, but
Sure. I mean, whatever you want.
there was always a sense of wanting to know. And again, that ties into the age that you're at and the understanding. Like, I just remember like being 7 or 8, and like, I grew up on a farm. So I would dig holes, like literally, and I'm like, there's some universe under there where this magical, that's home, that's where, like, and then also I think, and what I've come to understand is, as adoptees, we tend to, when we don't have the information, we tend to kind of glamorize our stories. So like I was some like lost, forgotten prince or something from Russia, and just, there was some underground fairy tale land where that's where home was, so like,
Yeah.
And then the older you get, that's when really it was like, okay, there's family out there. I come from somewhere. And then that's where I think, again, around 10 to 12, that's where really I used to beg my parents and like, can I go and find my family? Can I go find my family? And like what that all entails in the journey that took. But they were always very open to it and just, and that's something I'm thankful as well, is they didn't take that as a personal, like, oh, we're not being good parents, he's looking for a replacement, like they understood, I think, the journey that I felt like I had to go on, and they were very respectful of that. And then they always said when you were 15 or 16, that's when we'll like pursue this in earnest if that's something you want to do. And then I had very limited information available. Like I didn't have names. It was a closed adoption. And I just remember like sitting up at night, like Googling, like all I knew was my birth name. So I would do different combinations, like
Yeah.
Russia, Cherson, like Novosibirsk, and just like go through social media, like Facebook pages, and just like, are there people that look like me? And that's where I think the dividing line really is, because that was a monumental part of my journey coming into my teenage years, where most kids were just like more concerned about, oh, let's go have fun after school or that. Like that's kind of the stuff that I felt like I was kind of wanting to pursue at that time.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that, I'm impressed that by age 10 to 12, you were already very, very like curious, asking questions. I mean, I'll admit a lot of the people I've talked to over the years tend to wait until they seem to be closer to 17, or I don't know why, but that's, I guess you just know when you know, and only you can answer that.
Yeah, yeah.
So, okay. So when you got to then 15 and 16, I assume not much change in terms of you are still ready and
Oh, 100%. If
how,
anything, like the begging from my parents just increased, and it just like it was something. I had a lot of like stuff happen in my personal life, and maybe that's just where that feeling for the search just became that much stronger, because I was
yeah,
looking for a sense of belonging. Because I feel like coming into my teenage years, that's when I think I struggled with a sense of abandonment, and that really trickled down into my friendships and how I interact with people. And I remember like just having this negative self voice. Like if my friends were like 5 minutes late for meeting or something, right away I'd be like, oh, they don't want me. They don't want me. Like I'm just garbage. Like I started getting that kind of like very negative, strong sense of abandonment, really.
yeah.
So I felt like maybe this is a trip that I have to undertake to really, if I understand where I come from and why I was given up, maybe that would kind of lessen that, extremely negative voice that I had at the time.
Okay, yeah. Wow, that's very very deep. So, how about you like tell us about that conversation you had with your parents when you were 16, 15, and you said, "Okay, I'm ready. Let's do this." And what steps happened right after that?
I think for me, that's something I will always consider I very lucky that my parents listened, and I felt heard and I felt seen during that process. And it was something that was promised. Like when you're at the appropriate age, you will go back to Russia and you can put all the effort into like trying to find your biological roots. So when I got to that point, it was a summer after I was in grade 8. My dad booked tickets. He said, we're going to Russia. This is happening. And I just, yeah, that talk about a life changing trip, really, on all aspects.
So, when you went back to Russia, did you try to attempt to find any relatives, or did you not locate any, or how did that kind of come about?
I did. I think my main intention was trying to dig up some kind of link to my biological family, because, again, all I had was my birth name and my mother, a partial document with my mother's, some kind of form of her name on it, the renunciation document. So went to Novosibirsk, went back to the city where I was born, and just, it was very weird, because I think for the first time in my life, it's almost like the story that I've been told almost did not feel real. Like, how did I come from this Siberia, like this imaginary place? Like, it was too far for me to comprehend that this was a reality. And the story itself, like, how does a little kid from Russia end up in, Canada and the life? And like, why was I chosen, all those kind of questions. But so going back to the city and seeing similar sites, like my family also have a lot of like photo albums from when they went to Russia to adopt me. So seeing all of these like similar buildings and all this stuff, I was like, wait, this actually is real, you know? And then we decided to start by going back to the orphanage I was adopted from and kind of start there, like see what more information they had, if any. And I just remember like these are moments of your life that regardless of what happened, you just remember every single detail. Like pulling up to the orphanage and it's like, wow, this is where I spent time as a child, you know, and it was a very overwhelming experience. And the building is exactly the same like it was 20 years or whatever, 15 years prior. And the nurses were the same nurses. I
Yep.
pulled up like a bunch of stuff to give to the kids. So I had like 2 duffel bags. It was very, very emotional, like seeing all of these kids and like it was in the middle of summer. So they were just all sitting there with like just their diapers and sitting at tables. And there's like the nurses scurrying about trying to give them food and whatever else. And just walking there and just like, I lost it honestly. And I was like, I was you know, and I just wanted to pick them all up and just like hug them. And then we went and sat in the office. And when I was in the orphanage, there was a nurse that was very connected to me or whatever. Like she was my primary caregiver or whatever.
Yeah.
So my family had spent a lot of time talking with her. She's in a lot of the photos. So that was one of the first things I asked is like, is Ludmila still here? And they were like, no, but she actually works at like, there's an adult orphanage on the other side. She actually works there. So they actually called her on the phone and they were like, so my nickname, I guess, at the orphanage was Choopy Choops, like from Cherson, I guess, whatever. So they were like, in their own way, like Choopy Choops is at the orphanage and he's asking about you. And this is a moment I will never forget is like, we were like on the second floor in an office and there was like all big windows. And literally we seen her come running up the road and just, yeah, talk about like a big reunion and just, yeah. And I think it was for both of us. She was like, you actually came back and just, yeah, it was an incredible experience. And then we spent a couple days like just going back to the orphanage every day, spending time with the kids, spending time with the staff, and then also asking more questions. But because it was a close adoption, they were like, there's literally no more information that we're able to offer you. So as much as I had hoped to leave that trip with some more answers, I didn't end up getting that, but still it was, yeah, monumental journey. And even just spending the time in Russia, I was like, okay, I felt a lot more connected to my roots and I think helped form a bigger part of my identity of who I am.
Yeah. When you were in Russia, how long were you there for?
3 weeks.
3 weeks. Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So besides,
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, besides the orphanage, what else did you see when you were there? What else did you do?
We spent a week in Moscow and then we also went to Kazan. So we did the whole Trans-Siberian. We did like 27 hours of it and just connected with just the culture, did a lot of like sightseeing as well, did the Red Square and yeah, it was incredible.
Do you have any favorite places that you remember, like the food? I mean, how well did you do with the food? Did you handle it? Did you like it? Did you?
I did. It was definitely, yeah, again, to be then immersed in all of this for 3 weeks, it was a giant shift, I would say, in just my awareness overall. But I feel like I left that trip as well. Like after I came back to Canada, I definitely sought out more opportunities, like to hear Russian music, to taste Russian food, even just be around the culture.
Yeah, yeah. So you definitely felt more connected when you left. Besides when you first arrived, you left with that whole experience, and it was positive overall.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And
It's something I feel like I had to do. And it made me a lot more grateful, I think, for just my life, I think, because that's
yeah,
another thing that they told me at the orphanage. Like, had you not been adopted, this is what your life would have looked like. And I think, you go through your teenage rebellion and like, oh, I hate this. I hate this. Like, oh, my parents, I hate them. But I think, especially at that age, 15, 16, like that's when you're really transitioning into your teenage years and just hormones are raging and everything. And I think coming back to Canada after that trip, I came back with a lot stronger sense of just gratitude for the life I had and the opportunity I was given through adoption.
yeah. No, that's absolutely. So I guess the next question is when or if do you want to return to Russia?
If I could be on a plane today, I would be. I continued searching for my biological parents, and I think joining the Russian adoptees Facebook group, that was a huge step for me as well. I joined, I think, when I was 17, and just there were so many questions I had, and just seeing a lot of people also asking similar questions, it makes you feel not so much like an alien, almost like we have this unique experience, and there's not a lot of people in your daily life that you can talk to about these kind of things, and just to have a safe space to
Yeah.
ask questions or even just like check in, there's this kind of safe community, right? And through there, I was posting regularly, I think about like, I'm trying to find my family or whatever. And then I got a DM on Facebook from one of the group members and said like, look, I'm familiar with Novosibirsk. Like, if you need somebody to go and do the legwork, I'd be happy to help you out. Like, what information do you have? Her name was Carolina. I don't know if, but so I gave her all of my documents and just, because at that point I was like, whatever's going to help me get this done, I'm willing to do. Right. So, and I think that's where you get into a very emotional state. Like, I didn't check her credentials or whatever. Like, she was a part of the group, so you trust, but I was like, whatever, like, if this, here you go, take it all, so she did. And literally a week later, she got back to me and was like, I have information for you, and she's like, I found the place where your mother worked. She worked as a dishwasher in like a factory. So she's like, I'm going to go to the factory and I'm going to ask if they remember this woman who worked there. And kind of do that kind of legwork in country. So she did that. And then I remember one night I was driving and started getting messages from her. And she was like, do you have a minute? Like, I have what you need. And I was driving and I was like, okay, let's do this. And she's like, can you be parked or whatever? Like, you should. Because I was like, I'm almost home or whatever. She was like, okay. So I pulled my car over, and then that's when she basically was like, here's all the information. She was like, your biological parents are passed away, they're deceased, but you have two older brothers, you have a grandmother that's alive, you have nephews, all this stuff. So I remember just sitting beside the road and just like frozen, because my whole life, I think it was that conversation I wanted to have with my biological parents. Like, why did you give me up? And just because it filters through so many levels of life. Like, for example, every time you go to the doctor, it's like, what's your family medical history? And you're like, I don't know. So it's something that's very recurring. And just, I think, wanting to have that sense of a genetic connection for whatever sense, right? So that was very much something that was integral to this search, like that sit down conversation, like meeting these people who had given life to me and just asking these questions. And I think in that moment, it was all taken away, right? And I was like, yeah, it was a very emotional time. And then I was feeling sad, and I was like, how do you mourn people that you've never met, essentially, or don't remember, right? So it was a very weird time. And then through that, I also knew that I had brothers that were still alive. So she had given me contact over VK, and then through there we started messaging, and that was another interesting time, because they didn't trust, because this random person messages on Facebook or social media, and it's like, I'm your family, and they hadn't been aware that they had another sibling. So it's like, how do you then do that? I sent them the information. I was like, this is my biological mother's name. Does it match yours? And then as a Hail Mary, I think I just sent a picture of myself. And the second that they got the picture, they were like, oh, it has to be. Because like, I look exactly like my older brother. Yeah. And then through there, it was just like, yeah, it was a life-changing experience. And,
wow.
Yeah.
So
when I say, would you go back to Russia? 100%, because I haven't met them yet. Because at that point in time, I was considering going to university to study journalism. And I remember it was like, I was at a point where I was like, either I do this, I just take a year off, and just because it's a journey. Like, I would have to spend a couple months there minimum. It's very expensive because you need translators, whatever else. So I was like, it's either I take a year and do all that now and get it out of my system, or I go and, at least get my education, get myself financially good. And because it's also an emotional experience, I don't know what I would do coming out the other side of that and then having to start, a 4-year degree. So yeah, made a choice to do school first, get myself set up, and then it wasn't until recently that I was just like, wait, I made that promise. Like, did I follow up? But then you also have the war, which, complicates things a lot. But if I could go today, I 100% would.
Well, I mean, on the bright side, I guess you get to travel there as a Canadian, so I feel like it's a bit more neutral going into Russia than as an American.
Yes, 100%.
So yeah, but yeah. I mean, that's amazing. I mean, it's hard. I couldn't imagine getting that news that your biological parents passed before you had a chance to ask them questions. But the fact that you have, a grandmother around, that's going to be a real good source of information. And I'm sure she'll be able to answer a lot of questions that you have
Yeah.
about your parents. Yeah.
Have you met biological family?
I've gone back to Russia, and yes, yes.
What was that like?
Well, it was really odd at first because you're looking at someone who's staring at you that looks exactly like you. And
Right.
then they try to point things out, like little things that you do that they do as well. I mean, it's simple things from apparently when I sit or I'm just casually just sitting there, I'll like do this with my hair a lot and
Okay.
they make a comment and say, "Oh, I do the same thing." And you start to notice little weird, just I don't know, maybe they're just overthinking it, but it's just I met everyone but my biological father. He was in Ukraine at the time, and I was traveling when Crimea happened,
Okay.
and so when that was a pretty bad time to travel as well. It was actually kind of funny when before we left my adoption agent in the U.S. She said, "If anyone asks about your political preference or opinion, say you're Canadian." So I didn't see him, but I talked to him over the phone and I got to meet his mother in another village and his brother, so my uncle. So that was interesting, but uh, it was definitely a surreal moment. I met, aunts and uncles and plenty of cousins, and I had a younger brother and sister I didn't know about. They didn't know about me either, so that was quite interesting. But I mean, just looking at it, I agree with everything you said about you get there and you're overwhelmed. It
Yeah.
feels like a fairy tale, yet it feels like somewhere that you have been before. Almost like it's. I mean, I don't know if you had this experience when you walked into your orphanage. Do you remember
Yeah.
the first thing that you smelt when you walked in?
The floor,
The
like
fl-
the floor treatment or whatever, like cleaning. It was very overpowering. And like
okay.
really say that, yeah.
I was going to say, so I walked in and it smelled, pretty clean as well. I'm sure they sanitized it because they knew they had visitors coming, but who knows, maybe, or you hope they would keep it clean. But I remember walking in and had that like cabbage comfort smell of like
Oh,
soup or borscht and it
yeah.
just you just took a breath, like a deep breath of that, and I'm like, wow, like my body just felt comfortable. It was like a weird feeling, like yeah, I've been here before, and it's like, well, yeah, duh, I was here. But yeah, that's incredible. So how long has it been that you've been in contact with your relatively newly discovered family in Russia?
8 years.
8 years. Okay, so not
Yeah.
as new. All right, so
But it's tough, like, and that's where, like, I'm really sitting with myself. And I had actually posted in the Facebook group a couple weeks ago, and I was like, because one, I'm not aware of just where we are geographically with this war and everything, and like, there's a lot of, I feel like, information that's fed to us by people that actually don't know. Like one stereotype that I've been told is when like me holding a dual citizenship, you're going to be drafted. So don't go back during this and this age. And it's like, who's telling me this? That's where you have to learn to be very wary of who's telling you information. And just, I've realized Siberia is far enough away from the action. Not that there's any action in Russia, but just I feel like it's safe. And I think, yeah, we as Canadians, and when I went back when I was 15, like I've never felt safer being in a country, right? So I think the big fear is having lost both of my biological parents. The longer I put this off, like my grandmother's old, she's like 77, 78. And I think if I were to lose another family member before I went back, I think you would start feeling more guilt. Like, I had this information, I didn't do anything with it. So now I'm actually making it a big mission this year to just do it. Take a month off, August or September, and just go. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I do know people who have traveled to Russia, similar situation as you, who are even in the U.S. that just say, you know what, I'm going to do it. And there's a couple Canadians, actually, you probably know them. I'll talk about that with you offline later. But, a lot of people are making journeys, even with the situation going on over there. And honestly, the truth is, at the end of the day, you're registered out of country. You're not registered in Russia. So from a male's perspective of the whole fear of getting drafted, that's probably never going to happen. That just wouldn't make sense. But yeah, that's just my opinion. I'm not the law or anything. I'm just saying.
Yeah. I feel like, and I've done things in my life too, like I put myself in situations traveling, but I feel like this is something, if I was going to risk my life for anything, this would be it. So I'd be willing to take whatever consequences, if there was any, because at this point, it's just such a monumental thing for me that I'd be willing to take any, if there was any sort of risk or whatever, I would be willing to take it.
Well, now that you say that, I just remembered that you went to school for journalism, and your job is in journalism, I assume, right?
Yeah.
So
Spent in the Middle East last year, and that was definitely put myself in situations.
Wow.
So
okay.
I do have to maneuver that, but I'm being careful not to associate Russia with, because from my understanding, it is very safe there.
Yeah, no, it relatively is. Yeah, I mean, Moscow alone, as you know, because you went back, it's probably the cleanest city and it's the cleanest city I've ever seen, and
yeah,
it was gorgeous. It was a great time, great place to visit.
I want to ask you a question, actually. As a result of this war, Russia's reputation is very much stained internationally. How is that something you've picked up on, and how does that make you feel? Like, for example, I'm having a harder time open up about being Russian, especially during this time, because it is so demonized to be associated with that. And like, even in Toronto, like, there was Pravda Vodka Bar, which was like a Russian establishment, and they actually removed the name. They changed it because they're like, we don't want any Russian association. So it's like, through this, we're seeing more erasure of our culture, essentially, in westernized countries. And it's something that does make me sad, as much as I can empathize with, I'm against this invasion, but it's a catch-22, really.
Yeah, it's hard. I will say that in the last couple of years, I've been more quiet about it. I will say that, just because the reality is, we're stuck in this kind of awkward position where, we don't, we're against, our morals may say, no, but it's like, that's still where we're from. And some of us are still proud of where we're from, as anyone should be proud of what country they're from. If they have roots there, if they have family members there, and you worry about their safety too. But in a country that, is, I mean, you're in Canada, so I don't know, you guys you kind of follow what the US does in terms of relations usually. But I mean, I know especially with my line of work, I work in the defense industry, and you pretty much don't talk about it at all, because it's a security risk. That's how they look at me. I hate to say it, but they look at me differently. Background checks take longer for me. All this stuff takes longer for me because of who I know. And luckily, most of my friends and family know that I'm not gonna, drop everything and move over there and join the cause. I'm not gonna do that. But the general public, it's unfortunate, because I feel it's more of a lack of education and understanding of what's actually going on over there. And the realization is that it's the governments that are disagreeing, not the people. The Russian people are very, very hospitable people, and they love Americans. They love them. And I feel like we do too. We love the Russian people. It's just the governments don't get along. But I will say, though, just to not like fuel the flames, I've taken down my Russian flag that I fly outside and put that in. And then I put up the Ukrainian flag for a while, because I'm like, okay, we got to show that we're not supporting the bad country, right? And then I said, you know what? Forget this. We're going to go neutral. And you'd be proud to know I have 2 Canadian flags flying outside
Yeah,
just because I'm like, you know what? We're right next to Canada. I love Canada, so why not? You can't go wrong with that. But
another interesting dynamic to this whole war too is my brother and sister are actually adopted from Ukraine. So it's like that was
oh
something to
man,
remember the night that Russia invaded Ukraine, and my brother called me, and we sat up most of the night, kind of following what was happening, and just like we're like, because like our cultures are so much a part of us. Like I'm the Russian, they're the Ukrainians, and like here we are now at war, but it's something that's far away, and if anything, that was a moment that drew us closer together because it's like it's sad to see what human hate and just
yeah,
power people do, but it's so far beyond us, and just I think we just have to be humans and just it doesn't our backgrounds don't.
100%.
Yeah,
Exactly. And I hope things get resolved and we can go back to just, respecting everyone's culture and where they're from and their history. And I know that might be hard. It might take a while, but
yeah,
I'm sure we can overcome it. But no, it's definitely it's a touchy subject for a lot of people.
yeah,
And you just kind of have to be cautious of, at the end of the day, it's, do you really want to draw more attention to you? That's the
yeah.
truth. So, you can still be proud of it. Like you can still be proud of where you're from, it just means you don't have to, run around in a Russian Olympic jacket in public,
Right, yeah.
which I
And
have one.
you can use it as an educational moment as well. Like, not that I'm going around waving my Russian flag, but in those conversations where it's just, your name or something comes up, or I have like Russian adoptee on my social media or whatever, I tend to use it as an educational moment and just like, this is a government thing. It's, if you go to the country, like the people are all incredible, and
Yeah,
it's so far from beyond what these people are actually wanting to do. And the way Western culture tends to demonize Russian
exactly.
identity.
100%. Yep. Yep. Well, I'm glad we just solved foreign policy. So my next question for you is, after your trip to Russia and all the connections you made with your family, did you ever experience any internal struggles growing up being adopted that maybe it took you a while to realize until you are now older and you went through this whole journey? I know you mentioned a little bit about your first names, Corne and Yuri, and which one you prefer over the other. So, let's dive into that and tell me your thoughts on that.
I think it's a journey definitely of just self-understanding, and even now at 29 there's things that I look back, and there's days where I feel like the luckiest person in the world to be adopted, and there's other days where I'm just like it's a journey and it's a struggle, like small little things, for example, that you don't realize how big of just an impact that this concept has on your life. Like I have this thing where I hate eating around other people. Like it just in
Mhm.
large groups, like even when I have friends over and stuff. And there was this thing that I used to like, we would make food in the kitchen, and I would literally take my food and go to the bedroom and eat it there. And I'm like, why? And then there was something that going back to the orphanage and seeing these kids eating and stuff, I realized that because I was always like a smaller person, I wasn't like the big guy of the group or whatever. But one of my defense mechanisms from that environment is to like put as much this is like definitely oversharing, but just like putting as much food into my mouth as possible and then slowly digesting it. And just I think subconsciously that's why I hated it. But I've come to understand that that's just something I did in that kind of institutionalized environment where you spend your formative years where you have food being set in the middle of the table, and these kids are like expected to just help themselves and get as much as they can, and it just becomes a free for all. And that was one of my mechanisms, I guess, of just like ensuring that I got food from the bigger kids, is I would just put as much in my mouth and then slowly digest it. And it's just like, how do you overcome that? And it's just the more aware you are of things and understand why you do them, that's when you can start to, I think, work on it. And I think there's a lot of like self-forgiveness that you need as well. Like through the overcoming the sense of abandonment, like that was all areas of my life, relationships, friendships, and just there were days where I was like, I'm just too like, there's too much damage almost to like be in healthy kind of friendships and relationships, but there's no way to overcome it than through it. And just, I think being connected with other adoptees and just through therapy, I've been in a lot of therapy to help understand where this comes from, and just tackling that big kind of existential question is like, where do you find your self worth if you were given up because of who you were? And the more you understand about why things happen, like in my case, it was a financial decision. Like, my parents literally could not afford to have another child, and
Right.
that's why I was sent to an orphanage. So instead of then through that kind of juvenile lens of like me, like it was something with me, like I was an ugly baby, or just I wasn't worthy of being loved. You just, growing into adulthood, it's just like it was a rational decision. Like, there was no money. They wanted in their own way for me to have the best life that I could. And that's why I ended up in an orphanage. So yeah, it's definitely a journey.
Yeah. I can resonate with you a lot with the whole identity and like seeing who you are. And, I feel like every adoptee honestly goes through that journey at one point or another where they kind of question who they are. And it's a big question, not just based off of genetics or nature versus nurture or anything like that. It's just like yourself, like who do you identify as when you realize as you get older, like, wow, I grew up in this environment or with these people, but then I have this whole other side of me that I just discovered, and this is where I'm from, and it's totally different. And how do you balance that? And
Right.
it's a lot to take on. Yeah.
It also comes and goes in waves. There'll be times where I'm just very much focused in life, whether it was through school or with work. And it's like, this is my environment. I'm very happy with my identity. This is me. And then now, like just even a couple of weeks ago, where I kind of had that trigger of like, now's the time to go to Russia. I find then it's almost like I focus more on that aspect of my identity. Like, I'm like, oh, but then it's been such a while since I've had Russian food, and it's been a while since I've done this. And then I tend to like just nosedive into my culture again. So, and knowing where you stand, I think like to this day, I'm still, if somebody asks me like, what's your, I always say Russian. And then there's almost some hesitation there, because it's like, because I'm not surrounded in that environment, I'm not in that culture. What does that mean? And there's never going to be a perfect answer for me, I think, on that, just because it's such a fluid situation.
Yeah, no, it is. And, people are going to be quick to judge and try to tell you how to identify or, but at the end of the day, it's like only you know who you are. And as long as you're comfortable with that, that's at the end of the day, all that matters. That's just
I
my
think
opinion, but
the one thing I really still want to do, and it's it's a very, very tough decision, is I do want to change my name back to Yuri. I really do. And I don't know what's holding me back. I think it's the fear of offending my parents. And because it's like, this is what
have,
they've done. They've given me everything. They've given me the second chance. And I think what it means is just sitting down with them and having a conversation and knowing my intentions. I'm not doing it to separate myself from them, but just, I feel like that is the one little thing that I can do for myself. Like, just, this is who I am. And it's kind of like, it's okay to be who I am in that sense. If that, yeah.
so do you think that changing your name back to your Russian name, Yuri, you think that will fill a maybe a missing gap or a missing part?
I feel it would give me more of a sense of a connection, I think,
Yeah.
and kind of bridge the gap between the two worlds, because we are essentially juggling these two personas almost. Like, there's this part of me that's Russian, that's connected to this
Yeah.
country, Siberian. He has a family there. I have two brothers. Like, there's this whole world. And then there's my life here, where I have an adoptive family, I have a brother and sister, my career, my life, but it's kind of like you're
That's right.
holding these two worlds and there's no connection. And I think for me, having my name be Yuri, I think would be somehow a thread that connects the two. Because I think I'm
Yeah.
always looking to balance it somehow, and it's impossible.
Yeah, no, it definitely is. But again, yeah, as long as you think that's the best thing, and you have that conversation with your parents, and you just let them know, hey, this is just for me. This is not to insult anyone, or it's not going to change anything. You just,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, it's just about going in there and at the end of the day, taking care of yourself and taking care of like mentally being okay as well. I mean,
Yeah,
adoption, as you know, it's complicated. That's what, it's a complicated story that most people don't understand if they're not adopted. And that's
100.
why it's nice to connect with other adoptees, because we have that instant bond that is so overwhelming and emotional that we need that outlet, because it's hard to try to, if we're struggling ourselves just to figure it out, imagine trying to go to someone else who's not adopted and having a conversation about it. They're not going to have any idea, and you're just so
Yeah.
that's
And I
yeah.
think also the older you get, the more you can view things from a logical standpoint. Like before, I very much had that like ideality of nobody understands this. It's just me like trying to figure this out. And I think growing up, you realize also there's another part to the puzzle almost. Like I think in feeling unheard and unseen in that kind of through that lens, now looking back, I realized that there was also parents who felt the same way. They had undergone this journey that was not very typical, and I think you can see it from almost an external perspective, and feel a sense of just empathy for all parties involved, because it's not just my journey, it's my family's journey, it's the community's journey of welcoming in this like child from this place that they've never heard of before. So I think as much as there's been a lot of feelings over being adopted, and sometimes I've been very vocal about it, I think now I'm finally at a point where I'm truly at peace and just, I all I can I'm at the point now where I just feel like I've really won the lottery in the sense of just having the life that I currently do.
Oh, that's the best, probably best outcome you could get. So that's awesome. So my final question to you is, if you were to leave a piece of advice for maybe another adoptee or any of our listeners, what piece of advice would you give based off of your experience so far in life?
Find connection if possible, because it can be a very isolating journey if you're not connected, and just whatever means you have possible to talk to people, even if there's no Russian adoptees, or even that, just being connected with people that have an understanding of the adoption process and what it's like. I think that is healing on so many levels, and it's something I want to be there for people that are going through that journey and any questions they have, because it's been monumental in my life, and just feeling to be a part of even the Russian adoptees group, this space where regardless of what I'm going through, I feel like I can ask a question and I know people will understand where I'm coming from. And it's a very small percentage of the world that is going to be able to understand this journey, but it's groups like that that really make you feel seen. So I would say find connection.
That's perfect. Yeah. And there's always going to be someone out there that is going to be willing to lend a hand.
100%.
Yeah, especially in the adoption community. There's a lot of good people out there, and I think you're one of them. So, well, Yuri, it was amazing to have you on the show today. Thank you so much for your time and coming on and sharing all of your stories so far. And we look forward to welcoming you back anytime, especially after your upcoming trip this in the year. It'll be fascinating to hear when you get back how everything went. So again, thank you so much for giving us a part of your day and coming on and getting everyone to know who you are.
And thank you so much for your time, David, and thank you for having me. Honestly, it's been an experience, and I'm thankful for this. So thank you.
Absolutely. Well, anytime, and we appreciate it, and we appreciate you. So thank you so much, and we'll see you next time, definitely.
Sounds good.
For those who want to listen to Yuri's episode, you can go to voiceofadoptees.com at any time. We're on all the podcast streaming platforms. And if you're adopted or you know someone, send them our way. We'd love to have a chat. Thanks for tuning in to another episode, and we will see you very soon. Remember, Voice of Adoptees. Who am I?
Thanks for listening to Voice of Adoptees. Please take a moment to like, subscribe, and leave a review. See you next time.